Metro Board of Education Governance Committee meeting. Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Dr. Severe, can you call the roll?
Yes, Dr. Gentry. I see she's online. She's still muted. Miss Elrod?
Present.
Miss Elrod is here. Miss Masters?
Present.
Miss Masters is present. Mr. Little? Mr. Little, I don't see him yet. Miss Bugs? Miss Bugs is not on yet. Miss Bush? Miss Player Peters?
Present.
Miss Tyler?
Present.
And Miss Pooper Walker is present. I think the others will be joining you momentarily.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will kick off with discussion about a revision to the Code of Ethics policy, which is 1.106. And Dr. Severe and I took a look at this together and thought maybe some slight revisions could be made. And so I'm going to pass the baton to him and let him talk through some of the changes that we're proposing to make to this policy today.
Thank you, Ms. Pooper Walker. Yes, I was asked to look at this policy to see what works with it and what could be improved, and something that we always strive to do with all of your policies. Essentially, the red line version you have in front of you does four things. It converts the ethics committee from a standing committee to an ad hoc committee. It provides some flexibility in terms of who can serve on that committee. It clarifies that this policy covers all the codes of ethics adopted by your body. And finally, it clarifies the scope of and limits somewhat the reach of the committee. And if you're okay with it, Ms. Pooper Walker, I'd like to just sort of read through it red-lined as it would read, remembering that this is a first draft, not a last, and that we would consider any edits that you would offer to be friendly amendments, if that's okay with you, Ms. Pooper Walker.
Yep, go right ahead.
So under section 5, where you see the color, the aqua and the red, section 5, ethics complaints, the school district, school district changes to school board. The school board may create by a majority vote an ethics committee consisting of no fewer than 3 members and no more than 5 members who will be appointed by the chair of the Board of Education. The majority of members of the committee shall be members of the Board of Education. No non-board members appointed to the ethics committee shall be school district employees.
David, you're muted.
Well,
I've been able to hear him just fine.
okay, good. Let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'll pick up where I think I was. No, that's line blue 10. Members of the committee shall be members of the Board of Education. No non-board members appointed to the ethics committee shall be school board employees. The ethics committee shall convene as soon as practicable after its appointment and elect a chair and secretary. The records of the ethics committee shall be maintained by the secretary and shall be filed in the office of the director of schools, where they shall be open to public comment. The scope of the ethics committee shall be limited to the approved motion that formed the committee, and the work of that committee shall cease upon the conclusion of that work. The scope of the content can be expanded or narrowed through a subsequently approved motion of the board. Questions and complaints regarding violations of the board's codes of ethics or any violations of state laws governing governing ethical conduct should be directed to the board chair or the ethics committee chair. Complaints shall be in writing and signed by the person making the complaint and shall set forth in reasonable detail the facts upon which the complaint is based. So all that, and that's the end of that. Although it looks like there's a lot of change, really it's not that much. You see that probably the biggest change is line 15, which essentially says the reason the ad hoc committee would be formed needs to be laid out on the front end through a motion, an approved motion of the board. and that if it needs to expand, then you probably need to come back to yourselves and see if you need to expand the scope of whatever the board, the ethics committee has been charged to do. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about what you've got in front of you.
I have a question, Chair Pooper Walker. Hello? Can you all hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm having fun with my little earbuds. Okay, go ahead.
So I just want to understand a bit more. So could you give me an example of what the scope of an ethics committee could or should be?
So if a complaint was made against a person and the board chose to investigate that complaint by way of an ethics committee, and it was found out that something, in the process of the investigation, something else was uncovered, that reaches beyond the scope of what the motion set forth to do. It's accused that Ms. Buggs did A. In investigating A, we found out there's not only A, but there's maybe a B.
Okay.
Okay. So, but that's beyond what you were originally intended to look at. So, I put that sentence there. You would come back and say, we've also got some information that would lead us to believe that B also occurred. Well, we don't think that's for us to decide. We're going to stick with A, or yes, let's expand it to B.
All right, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions about changes to this policy today? Proposed changes.
Could I walk through go ahead, pardon me.
I was just going to say I was going to make a motion, but I'm go ahead.
Okay.
So I would like to propose that if you're going to move to adopt this, at least conceptually, that between now and the time it would appear before you for ratification in a couple of weeks, I think there's some time for you to think about it and think about ways you might think it could be improved. I have no ego on this. I don't know that Ms. Pooper Walker does either. And I think we would both be open to some suggestions if you felt like it could be made better. And if that's okay with Ms. Pooper Walker. I just want you to know I'm willing to work with all of you on this.
Okay. Ms. Blair Peters, do you have a question?
I do not.
Okay. I just saw your mic was on. Okay, Ms. Buggs, did you want to make a motion?
Sure. I move that we accept changes to the ethics committee as listed.
Second.
That's Ms. Elrod. Thank you so much. Any discussion? So just for clarity, I'm sorry, who's that?
I'm sorry, this is Sharon.
Hey, Sharon.
I have a question, and we may be the only ones here, and we may be talking to ourselves, but just for the record, I think one of the things that is always a question, right? So we've discussed ethics and ethics policy and ethics concerns on the board for years, right? Things have come up over the years. And the question is always consequences, right? So you have the ethics policy, and I know the policy speaks to the actions that the board can take. They were not red line items, but just for the sake of this discussion, can you go through what the actions, if the complaints are found credible, what are the actions that the board can take?
Jamal, could you scroll down a little bit for me, please? And here it is, the unveiling. The committee may, and this is unchanged, obviously, from what your current policy is and what has been for a long time. Refer the matter to the board attorney for a legal opinion. In the case of an official, refer the matter to the school board body for possible censure if the board finds that such action is warranted. If the case is an employee, refer the matter to an official responsible for the supervision for possible disciplinary action. Or if it involves violation of a state law, refer that to the DA for whatever consequences would be appropriate for that. So there are really four things.
Okay, thank you for that. And just for further clarification, can you explain what a censure is?
A censure is essentially, as I understand it, and I believe Ms. Roberge is on here as well, if she wants to lend anything additional, but it's essentially a reprimand.
I would agree with David.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted it all laid out.
Okay, any other questions on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. David, can you help? Dr. Severe?
Yes, Dr. Gentry?
Aye.
Dr. Gentry votes aye. Ms. Elrod?
Aye.
Ms. Elrod votes aye. Ms. Masters?
Aye.
Ms. Masters votes aye. Mr. Little? Let me just double check. I don't believe he's on. Ms. Buggs?
Aye.
Ms. Buggs votes aye. Ms. Bush? Ms. Bush is not on the line. Ms. Player Peters?
Aye.
Ms. Player Peters votes aye. Ms. Tyler?
Aye.
Ms. Tyler votes aye. Ms. Pooper Walker?
Aye.
Ms. Pooper Walker votes aye. Madam Chair, you have 7 ayes, 2 not present.
Okay, thank you so much. We will move on to the next thing on our agenda. If Jamal could bring up the PowerPoint on having a student board member. And I'll try to be expeditious here with time. And so this is really an extension of a conversation that we've had off and on. And I do know that in previous iterations of the board, so John Little can hear us, but he's texting that he can hear us, but he's not able to. I don't know if somebody can help him log on to the meeting. I don't know what the deal is there. So we've had student school board members before that have actually sat on the dais before and been part of the board, but that has not been the case for some time. I know that Chairwoman Buggs has had interns on the board as well, but this would more formalize this process. We have a policy that addresses having a student board member, but this would just, what I'm going to present to you today would be sort of the plan of action to get a student sitting on the board with us this fall for the next school year. So we'll go to the next slide. So I don't know that I have to make the case, but I'll make it anyway. So the benefits really, and this is, I also want to stop and say I had some wonderful fellows last summer who helped put this all together and create a policy memo and a set of tools that I'll refer to at the end of the presentation. So this was really their work in partnership with me. And so the benefits, of course, is for us to actually hear from students about the impact of decisions we're making and what's actually happening in schools on a day-to-day basis. To make sure students as end users have opinions that they can share to improve their experiences. It really lifts up sort of the notion of civic engagement and democratic citizenship. It is a way to develop more trust between students and the district, deepens our ability to connect with the community, and it brings another generational perspective to the board. Next slide. So the State Code TCA 49-2-202 allows for a student board member to serve on school boards, and they can be selected prior. And so this kind of lays out the policy of TCA policy here. Can have not more than 4. They cannot be compensated, but they may be reimbursed for reasonable and necessary expenses. Okay, on to the next slide. And they're advisory, non-voting members. So today really, or not today, but in general, what this board has to really decide on is voting on whether they vote, whether they're compensated, if there's a way in which that would happen, how they're selected, and eligibility. So next slide. So my recommendations to the group, and I'm eager for feedback. It can be today or it can be later, but next slide is and so this is our code, this is our policy, and that we can have 2 student board members that are non-voting. They can't have a binding vote, but they can be recognized in board discussion. This is a recommendation that they be high school students in 11th or 12th grade, that they serve for 2 years. And they're expected to attend board meetings, can serve on committees, and fully contribute and be prepared for board meetings. So what I'm proposing here is that we probably have a junior and senior each year. So we kind of have a cycle through, and we have a senior perhaps sitting at the dais with us and a junior attending as well. And then we have sort of an ongoing participatory process and began sort of that process this fall with new students. Next slide. So this would be a non-voting member. They can engage in discussions. They can voice their opinion. I think I already said this, serve on committees, and they can also propose resolutions. They just can't vote on the resolutions. Next slide. Okay, this is I didn't realize that this did this. So I guess you keep clicking all the way, Jamal, till the end of the population of this. So these were the recommendations from our fellows, and this is where I'm very interested in feedback. So we talked about having a 2.5 GPA requirement, student in good standing, student that's proven interest in civic engagement, maybe has not been perhaps an elected student leader formally, but has expresses interest. We want to see students that reflect the diversity of our district, and we want them to be a junior or senior. Any thoughts on this particular slide?
I can just say, I mean, I appreciate that we're making it 2.5 GPA, and we're looking for engagement, and we're looking for diversity, and we're looking, for those students further in their, matriculation. So I like the idea of a well-rounded student, a well-rounded student that could offer general feedback and questions and thoughts. So I'm liking this a lot. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thanks. Ms. Tyler, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to the engagement piece. Like Ms. Bugg said, I like the well-roundedness of it. And I do like that it's not a requirement to have been an elected officer for something. And I think that that proven interest in civic engagement can go outside of the school.
That's right.
Well. Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure that was a part of it.
Right. And I think when I say proven, I mean that they can, testify to their interests,
Yeah.
right? I think we're not looking for all of the high flyers in every school. I think we'd love to see a broader, Yes, thanks. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Okay, if you want to click through to the end of this slide. And so this is, again, proposed to you all. The idea here is we would have, and so I want to say that the fellows that worked with me last summer drafted a job description for the student board member, and drafted an application, drafted a rubric for evaluating the applications, drafted a plan for outreach and recruitment. So we can pull from all of that and sort of tweak it to our liking. And so we would conduct outreach. We would also use our many community partners that work with high school students every day to help us get the word out there. We would have an application created, open to any high school student, 11th and 12th grade, fits our criteria. We would have a screening committee, and we can talk about who would serve on that committee. I am worried / excited that we're going to get a lot of applications, and it's going to be a tough process. So we'll have to really be thoughtful about how we go about that. And then I think we would probably interview some finalists for the positions. So, any thoughts about this piece right here? Hi there, Ms. Tyler.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're muted.
Thank you. I saw it at the same moment. Are we going to have any sort of requirements about being from different schools, or is that something that's going to be, or different quadrants, or anything to represent diversity, or is it just going to be kind of at the discretion of the board depending on who the applicants are?
I think absolutely. I think it's fair to not pull from the same school, right? Or not pull just magnet school students or just schools, right? And so I think really being thoughtful about that. I also think gender is important to consider as well. And so if we have 2 students, right? So I think all of that sort of criteria will be really important. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Buggs?
With the application, how do we plan on marketing it? Like just uploading it to the MNPS website and kind of announcing it Did you have anything different in mind, or can we just kind of send to our networks at our leisure, send to the principals, and ask for recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. I think it is send to principals, send to all of our partners doing work with our high school students, to counselors, to, I think anybody who, parents, right, can also work with their students. But I do really believe it should be the student that obviously completes this and does the legwork for sure. So I'm going to move to the next slide, which we have some more detail here. And so this is proposed, maybe ambitious. Let me know. So I'm thinking in February, we could sort of create a small ad hoc committee to kind of finalize this work, bring it for final approval. So take a look at all the materials that have been created, make adjustments, and then begin to work with partners on not only the outreach process, but perhaps even the application selection process. So then we would be conducting recruitment and outreach in March. Into April, pick a deadline, select students somewhere April, May, and then by July, they would be onboarded and brought on. We could also consider having them start in August. I think having them start before school starts is probably a good idea, but I'm open to other suggestions. Any thoughts about this timeline?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think that, thank you. I think, I know we've discussed this before, and I had said that I thought it was important that we had applications selected before the end of the school year. And so I think this timeline is doable and mirrors kind of our classroom schedules as well pretty well. So I think this is probably the right timeline for us.
Okay, great. Thanks. Other thoughts about the timeline? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So again, I will say that a lot of this legwork has been done, which is part of the reason why I feel comfortable bringing this to you all today. I would ask for any volunteers that want to serve on a maybe 1 or 2 time ad hoc committee that would just meet to make sure we have looked through these details, green lighted all of them. I'm happy to sort of chair this and move it to completion. With the support of some of my colleagues here. And so what I will remind you is that what has been fully developed, ready for edits, are a description, an application, a rubric, a recommendation form. If we decide we want to have a recommendation form, whether it's from a teacher, a pastor, a coach, an employer, whoever, there's a developed outreach plan, and these wonderful individuals developed out a handbook for the students on onboarding and sort of expectations and that sort of thing that we can also go through. I can share all of those with you after the meeting today, if you're interested. So any comments about this?
I do have one question. I don't think I've missed it yet, but what kind of pull on staff might this be? Like, do we need to involve staff at a high level, or will this be more something that we do the legwork on?
I think that is a good question. I think one that we'll have to consider when we decide like how that onboarding works, right? I would assume once students are onboarded, they would receive agendas from Ms. Bobo like we do. They would receive materials ahead of time. They would be invited to different kinds of events. But there probably will need to be some early on, particularly some hand-holding on how process works, on expectations and that sort of thing. So it's a good question to consider. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Other questions, comments? I think the next slide is just
last question.
Yes.
The ad hoc committee, are you just looking for board members to kind of ask if they can join? Is this going to be a committee of the whole? Do you really care, like how we flesh it out? Because I'm open to anything.
I think what I'll do is I'll schedule something with Dr. Severe, and anybody who wants to come can. I promise to be super efficient. And I think what we can do is ahead of time, people can look through these documents.
Okay.
Do any edits, comments. Also happy to create, other means to make sure this is really easy for everybody to participate in. But yeah, I don't have anybody can participate. So hopefully it's not just me. So also open to inviting the Alignment Nashville Youth Voice Committee to their they have an A team that, are they called A teams anymore? That very interested in this particular project and are very interested in being supportive and helpful in any way possible. So we'll probably plug them in. So, other questions, comments? What's the next slide? I think it just says questions on the next slide. Yeah. Any other final comments for folks? Concerns?
I just want to say this. I think this is a great. In high school, I was YMCA Youth in Government, which models the state government, and that's responsible for my own pathway into politics. And so I think this could be a great thing. This as a learning lesson, as an education lesson, as a leadership development, to have this opportunity. Even just going through a process like this is a great hands-on learning experience. So I'm excited to happen. I hope we all engage into it, make sure it's also a very thoughtful process and not just kind of, you just don't want a warm body in a seat and a warm student just to kind of be window dressing, but hopefully us as a board will really take this on to engage them, whoever the leaders are, but also members of the community to have this input of having someone who ultimately our own policies affect and effect. And so they can have a voice of how it looks like on the ground. And so it helps us shape our ideas. So as I'm happy to see this, I will volunteer myself to participate with it, and hopefully we'll have a lot of participation, and we'll have some, I know we have great students already within our system, and this will be able to way just to highlight this a small percentage of representative of our whole student body.
Okay, thank you so much for that vote of confidence. Last call to discuss student board members. Okie doke. So we can take the slide down, and then the last portion of this governance meeting is a discussion of our book. I'm really grateful to all of you for your enthusiasm on this. And so for the general audience, we are reading the Essential School Board book. Can you see that? This is the way my green screen is doing, the Essential School Board book. So folks read the first chapter, and I don't want to dominate this conversation. I would love to actually, if folks don't mind, board members turning on your cameras, and let's have a dialogue together, if that's possible, about sort of what's covered in the book, thoughts, reflections, questions. And so I'll just start with just a baseline sort of ground rules I'd love to set, which is that this is an exercise for me personally, is a way for us to, since we don't have a professional development budget or sort of a means to conduct professional development together right now, this is something that we could do together. And so my goal is that we would have meaningful conversations about the book and about what the contents of the book without necessarily going down rabbit holes of examples that could perhaps derail this conversation about good governance. So if we can keep it on the topic at hand, that would be super duper. So, and I know Dr. Battle also got a copy of the book and was going to read it. And so very excited about that. So I guess the first thing I want to ask is what goals do you all have about doing this book study? What do you hope for us to accomplish by the conclusion of it? If anybody wants to go.
I'll start. I'll say that I would love to see kind of tangible examples of next steps. You know, how do we elevate ourselves? Already in the first chapter, you're talking about best practices because it's research-based. It's based in humanity, humanizing the student's experience. So I love that. I have so many different thoughts, but one thing that I wanted to see is just some examples of how do we elevate incrementally, and then how do we bring the community into this elevation of what the board is supposed to do and how we can better support staff and students.
Anybody else?
I'll say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really like the idea of getting us all on the same page. I mean, I think that we're working from a shared definition of what we say is a solid, appropriate, effective school board. And so I do like the idea that we're talking it out to make sure that we are working from the same definitions on the same page.
Totally agree. Other folks? Yes, it's all right. Mm-hmm.
So I think to piggyback on what Ms. Tyler said, I look forward to us having a shared language and a shared understanding. An example that I would give to that is, I have a lot of highlights, is the last page on page 8. It has these 4 sacred duties of a school board. And I know that we commonly hear and say that we have, 3 main roles as a school board, and that those are encapsulated in here, but also kind of forced me to think about adding, we do have a responsibility of more towards the strategic plan. We usually lump that in with the director's evaluation. But the strategic plan is also something that we need to be more accountable to. And frankly, a lot of us on the board need to be more aware of just what it is and how it aligns to all of our decision making and all of our implementation that we do. And then advocacy, which is something that we have commonly talked about on the board from my time being on the board, and then even before that. And what does advocacy even mean? And so I thought that those duties were helpful in trying to help us expand, once again, like a shared understanding of our roles, how we can be most impactful, and then that common language of, what are those best practices. I also would like to just say very quickly that Mrs. Pupa Walker was very generous and provided these to us. And today our assignment was to read chapter 1. But if you didn't get the chance, I do suggest that you read the foreword and the introduction. I found those both to be helpful as well. And so in case you are strapped for time, like everybody I know, I do suggest that you go back and read those, as those were helpful and very short too.
Thank you. Dr. Gentry?
So, I think that one of the things that's interesting about these books, right? So, this isn't the only one. It's a really, really good one. There's lots of short readings and white papers on the internet that you can find that talk about this concept, right? So it's a universal struggle in the board role space. Is finding that right balance. And so for me, I think in the times that I've been on the board, it hasn't really been that there are board members that disagree with any of the things that this literature tells us, right? It's what the literature doesn't tell us. It's where it doesn't explicitly say what really isn't a safe space to play in. And when I say not a safe space, it's where is that space that's going to cause a ripple effect or cause waves or cause distractions or cause disruption, or really cause contradiction. So one of the things that was mentioned 2 or 3 times, even just in chapter 1, was about creating this climate of respect, ensuring that staff were respected, ensuring, all of those things specifically. And I don't know that often that boards are not always respectful of trying to seem engaged and connected and coming across as disrespectful and dismissive and creating that same climate that we believe we don't want to exist within our district. So I think the thing that's kind of, I don't know if we do it intentionally as we work our way through this, is to really be clear about what the corollary is to the guidance that's provided. So what are the consequences, intended or otherwise, of railing against or acting in contradiction to the guidance? So again, like I said, I don't think anyone would disagree with what's provided here. And so I'll add another piece to that. And I think it's understanding what pulls us into those disruptive spaces. What causes us to want to play out of position? Let me restate that. What causes us to feel that there is a need for us to play out of position? And so, I don't think that there's anything that great communication can't address. And so, maybe that's where we need to do a more healthy and more thorough job. But I would say that my desire is to ensure that we are clear on what the unintended consequences are from deviating from the guidance that's provided in texts such as these.
All right. Thank you so much. I can't see Ms. Masters, but I know she's on. Right. And I could see Ms.
I see you.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in at all or if Ms. Claire Peters wanted to jump in at all. I just want to give folks a chance to talk.
Just overall impressions. I mean, I found it very, I thought it was a great chapter. Ms. Elrod kind of was showing off about how she also read the introduction. That's fine. That's fine. You want to play it that way. What I really appreciated. I see what kind of student you were.
Yeah,
Fun.
I'll come pick up my ribbon later.
Yeah. Okay. That's all right. But the part about how poverty, lack of parent involvement, and other barriers, the most successful school boards see those as factors to be overcome rather than as obstacles. And so that was sort of empowering and exciting, and it got back to the whole reason for me why I ran for school board in the first place. And so I appreciated that that sort of level setting at a place of optimism instead of pessimism. So that was sort of what I enjoyed about the part I did read, which was the part that Ms. Pupo Walker assigned.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? I mean, I have questions, but I'm happy to let people kind of jump in.
Well, I love this little mini experiment we're having of seeing what type of students in academics we were and reliving our high school and college careers. So I think it'll be a great bonding moment for us. But I think what I thought was interesting, especially just my coming on board, but also even my experience in government, it's about the processing of data and how that affected, part of the experiment and how the two districts saw each other. But even as board members, like, you receive data, how do you digest it, internalize it, and then turn around, be able to process back that out to the public, but then also for us to lead. And how do you do that with regular meetings, short meetings, like different? And I think that's something, particularly given the size of our district and the information that we're, even just look at the office that has to handle and that presents to us, even their staffs and how they're doing it. So it'd be interesting this as we go along, as we move together as a board, how do we have time? We see the data, internalize it, process, and then turn around, and how do we export that data back to our communities, but then also how do we govern that data and our abilities with our own unique talents and expertise that we bring to it. How do we look through that lens? And so I think that's something that we also have to tackle. Just because just going through the past couple of weeks as we're going through this pandemic, we're processing a lot of information. We're about to go through budget season and having that thick budget book. And so everything from the overall district to the individual school board budgets. But so I think it'll be an interesting conversation as we go through this book study, how we deal with the actual business of being a board member, and how do we how we govern from a technical perspective.
That's great.
At the risk of being super obnoxious, because it's about the forward, I feel like I gotta say it though, y'all. All right, so in response to like Dr. Gentry's statement about, it focuses obviously on what makes a high functioning school board. That's the whole purpose of it. In the forward, it gives some examples of what is not a high functioning school board. And I think a lot of them are things that we already assume or have experienced. And most of that is here, kind of listed for us of just micromanaging on operational issues, weak knowledge and expertise, which I think really kind of brings me back to the strategic plan conversation, weak and fractious board superintendent relations, which we have had and sometimes still have. And then, hyper specialized interest of focused board members, and the micropolitics of highly mobilized local constituencies, which we've also discussed, particularly going back to that advocacy part of it. So my hope is for us to not only be engaged in reading it and, trying to get back in touch with what originally encouraged us to run and where we can be the most effective on what is the how. As it says in here, we're really supposed to be focused on what is the how of the why of the school system, not the how. That the superintendent focuses on the how and how it's done. But my hope is that we do kind of come up with some, as Chair Bugg said, some true action plans of how to put it into more than words. And I know that was obnoxious because I brought up the forward. But.
It's all good. Ms. Tyler, did you want to say something, or did I imagine that?
Well, I was just going to remark on a lot of this seemed to me to be common sense. And then also just having followed the board as, you know, in my capacity as a teacher, and then, you know, beyond, just seeing how different relationships have played out and how that affects the board. The one thing that I did find was a little bit surprising was that on page 3, it says the attitudes of the staff mimicked those of board members. And I had not thought about that in a way, you know, I think about it as the attitudes of staff within a school will often mimic how the principal is leading the school. And I'm sure that within central office, you see something similar. You know, the attitude of the director would definitely make an impact, but I had not thought about how the attitude of the board could affect. And so I didn't know if anybody who had more experience with that, if Dr. Battle wanted to address it, or if it's just, you know, a point to be made and move along. I don't know, but that to me was one thing that stuck out.
I totally agree. And I think it's true. I think it's absolutely true that how the board approaches their job every day and how they interact with one another and their communities and the superintendent has a huge impact, I think, on how people feel about their ability to weigh in, to participate, to take risks, to engage. So totally can see that. Yeah. I also want to just say one of the main reasons I ran was related to Frida's point around the use of data and how are we using data and evidence to guide decisions that we make, and are they informing our decisions? And I would love to think about that as a larger, personally, objective of this exercise is how is it that we are, in a way that's digestible, manageable, not like tons and tons of spreadsheets, but a way to really think about what are our measurable goals? What are we tracking against? Are we moving forward in the right direction? And if not, what do we need to change? I mean, for me, that is just essential to the role. So I was just going to talk a little bit about this idea of stuck and moving boards, right?
Ms. Cooper,
yes, ma'am.
Do you mind if I just pull on the thread that you said real quick?
Go for it.
The more I've been asked, you know, what is our goal for this year, or what do we hope to accomplish as board members this year, I do just continue to think about data. You know, I want to be in a space where I can competently speak about what's happening around our district. And I know it is so hard because, you know, we had a map test in the spring, in the fall, we're beginning map testing now. And so but how do we, without overburdening our teachers and our principals, how do we regularly check in on data? And then how does this board, like what are ideas and suggestions for this board or mechanisms that we can establish to make sure we're communicating well, are receiving data, and that we're not in because I don't want to be in a space where we're asking teachers to give more tests to give us to continue to give us data. I don't want to make more work for them. So how do we reflect, give real-time data that we can use in the community to advocate for what our students need? A convoluted way of asking, how do we do this? What do you all want to do around data, and how can we incorporate that into our agendas and into our meetings?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
I guess my question to that would be, is the data already there and we're just not receiving it in a concise packaged manner? And what's the delay between from that teacher to us? And then also we have day jobs and parents and families. So like, where's the capacity to receive and digest that data that's already there, more than putting more on the staff? Is that how are we receiving it and digesting it and comprehending it to bring it back also? And is there a delay just because of the process that goes back to the process? So
I'd argue that it's not just academic data we're talking about here, right? We're talking about school culture data, teacher satisfaction data, teacher turnover data, enrollment data. I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? And so I think we have to decide, is it fiscal data? Is it how are schools doing with student-based budgeting? I mean, there's a lot of information. It's $1 billion enterprise. How do we capture the information we need to be effective board members? And I think these are the right questions to start with. That's how I feel about it.
Well, can I ask you this, Ms. Chair Poopa-Walker? During your governance portion of the board retreat, could we carve out a little bit of time maybe to talk through, because the reality is we do have data and we actually do get data, But I'll be vulnerable and say, sometimes I forget it. You know, I forget that slide deck or that information that was sent to me because Dr. Battle sends those board reports every single week. But then how do I manage those conversations in the community when because the reality is, if the community were to ask us about learning loss, we haven't experienced any learning loss based on our data. Our data actually said that students were growing faster than they've grown in the past, but we also know, you know, via Dr. Changus in his presentation, that that's likely because parents are there guiding maybe a bit more enthusiastically and overzealously. So we're not getting true data, you know, so it's like, how do we continue to remember all these different data points, coordinate them into our agenda so that at least at the meetings, we're reverbalizing and restating to the community and saying again, and then, you know, just continuing to reiterate to change the narrative. How do we do that efficiently without overburdening any group, anyone? Again, I don't know that I'm half asking for an answer and half saying, hey, just think about this so maybe we can talk about this on next Friday.
Yeah, I think chapter 1 is planting seeds. So we're planting seeds here, right? To figure out what we want to grow, where we want to grow.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to kind of Ms. Buggs, what you were saying, I think our teachers do that all the time in the classroom. Mm-hmm. They are constantly being hit with data, and how do I use this effectively to motivate my students and to pinpoint where they're weak and where they're strong, and what do I need to work on, and what can we move beyond? And so, I mean, if we're really struggling, would not hurt to have a teacher come and talk to us about how do they manage it, because it is something that the best teachers manage well. And it is something that is definitely on their plate every minute of every day that they're in the classroom. So, yeah, I mean, or even Dr. Battle could talk to how she managed it when she was in the classroom or as a principal, or even now, because she's seeing the same data that we are. And I do think that it's important, back to your point about making sure that the data that we have is valid as opposed to just data points. And so making sure that we're digging deep into that data, that it's actually representative and that it's testing what we want to test. It's asking the right questions as opposed to just giving us more numbers.
Yeah, I think that confidence in the data that we get is so important. I saw Dr. Battle. Were you going to join us, Dr. Battle?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think speaking to the validity and the reliability of the information that's being provided is what we're hitting on. And I just wanted to comment, I appreciate being able to join and read along with the board, because I think this all ties right together. So for me, it's this coordinated effort and this vision casting around where we want to be. And it's the same thing about our intended outcomes and our intended purpose. If we know where we want to be, then it helps us to coordinate and correlate all of our actions in the in-between. So for myself and my team, it's good to level set here. And as I read chapter 1, to be honest with you, as I thought about the what next, kind of the action that you all have been talking about, I was also filled with confirmation that, oh, we can actually do this. Like, this is the bite-sized chunks around what's necessary for us to not be that stuck district, but, you know, moving forward all together in my role as a director of schools and in supporting the rest of my team. So I think it all ties together when you're talking about assessments. The more you can coordinate those efforts, be really clear about the intended outcomes, the faster you're able to accelerate in that space. And I did not jump in prior to now in the conversation, because it's also important for me to hear and listen, because it's easy to respond to, right? All the wonderings that are out there. But if we listen and plan well enough, we'll be able to set a clear, compelling, coherent vision of how we're going to move forward together. So thank you all for allowing me to join in and be a part of this conversation, because I know myself and my team have a role to play in our ability to move us forward.
So on the note about the data, Chair Walker, I'll be the one to throw the yellow caution sign out there, right? So there's no end to it. There's no end to it, right? So I get nervous when people in our role say, I want to do a deep dive into the data, because there's no end. That hole goes on forever, right? And so I would rather us flip the conversation to say, what's the problem we're trying to solve. How can we impact resolution or impact, as Dr. Battle articulated, where do we want to be? How, as a board, do we help? What's our role? What is our space in helping us get there? And then what do I need there? Right? Because, and again, I've seen board after board after board get so mired in data, and then we start having conversations because, you know, and I'm the first one to tell you, I know that data is just a symptom of something else. That's all the data does. Data's not the problem. Data doesn't tell you what the problem is. It's a symptom. So there's some research that's required. But then we find ourselves questioning, you know, resources and textbooks and initiatives and things that are very, very, very tactical. And to me, that's where you get stuck, right? Tactical is where we pay a lot of people a lot of money to live and breathe, right? And so what they need from us is red lights, yellow lights, green lights, right? The go ahead to say, the ear to hear their recommendation, acknowledgement and agreement on where we're stuck and where we want to be, and then their recommendations on how to free us from that quagmire. And then how do we support? Yes, I approve this contract. Yes, I mean, it's all out here in the book, right? Yes, I approve this contract. Yes, I agree on these goals and measurements. Yes, I agree on this. But the more we dig in data, the more tactical we get, because the deeper you go, the closer you get to the tactical. So I would say, first of all, Chair Buggs, there's no such thing as a short conversation around the data. So you may want to have a special conversation about just data. I don't think getting a little bit of time is going to be enough. But I would challenge us, and Ms. Walker, I'm happy to help with this, is find some examples of that, of how boards use data, just specifically that. Or how do these really good, really moving forward, really progressive, hitting it, knocking it out of the park boards use the data? They use it, but how are they using it?
That's great.
If you don't mind, Chair Poopa Walker, I want to be more impeccable with my wording and make sure that I'm casting what I really want to request. Like I said, we get the data. The issue is, or maybe I should frame the issue around the marketing of the data or how we present it to the community, because Dr. Battle gives it to us. Dr. Battle and her staff, they present it at each meeting, but then in the community, we hear misinformation. We hear things that are counter to that data. When we get, when we have public participation time, parents, teachers, staff come and speak to us. It's like, that's not reflective of the data that we've seen. So I guess my request is more for us to think about, how do we as a board use our positions to actually provide those supports around the district and let the community know that what they've assumed about our schools is not true, or that the data suggests something that their misinformation would counter. So it's just, we talk about the data, but maybe we don't frame it in a way as board members that the community and the media should actually listen to what our data says.
So I know we are.
Sense?
Yep, I know we are running short on time. I think this has been really fruitful. I would love for all of our board members to be able to participate going forward. I know that John had technical issues. I just think, if we're to do, as Ms. Tyler said, to all be starting from the same place and working from the same page and the same common language, I would love for everybody to be here. So I really, I had all these, the teacher that over-prepared I had 2 lessons for every class, just in case. So I do a lot of questions. So I'm really excited that we had this conversation. It really, it warms my heart. I will speak for myself. These are really difficult times to be a school board member and to be a superintendent. And the more we can have this kind of dialogue together about serving our district well, I think it's just better for everybody. So I appreciate y'all. And I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much. See you on the other side at the executive committee meeting. See y'all.